بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Today we're going to have a quick look at this book, which is Select Chapters of Itqan, translated by Sh Sohaib Saeed. May Allah preserve him. Just as a backdrop, what is Itqan? First of all, Itqan is, and I mentioned this as one of my earlier book reviews, is one of the biggest authorities in the sciences of the Quran. This isn't a translation of the whole book. This is a translation of one of the chapters in the book, one of the volumes, should I say, actually, in the book. It can be a 4-volume book, and this is basically the second part, if you like, or the second quarter, if you like. So he hasn't kind of translated the first chapter or the last chapter. So he hasn't kind of tried to translate in order. He's translated the second section. Why is that? Why would you just translate the second section? He kind of alludes to it in the introduction as to why this section specifically. This section very much focuses on a linguistic, the linguistic kind of tools, if you like, or the linguistic things that you need to know when it comes to interpreting the Quran. And one of the things the author is extremely keen on, or extremely interested in researching, is usul al-tafsir. How does one interpret the Quran? What are the tools required to interpret the Quran? And of course, the books of the science of Quran cover many different topics, from Mecca and Medini, and the first things that are revealed and last things that are revealed. These chapters might not be as important for a mufassir to understand every single word what's actually referring to. No doubt it's important. It's absolutely important in terms of understanding about the Mecca Medini, but this is very much like having a look at a linguistic look, which is of course vital for someone understanding the Quran. It's actually quite beneficial as well that he's translated this volume, and I'll tell you why. Because this second section is an extremely difficult section. A lot of it is lines of poetry that there's a very famous kind of incident that happened between Abdullah ibn Abbas and Ibn al-Azraq, where basically one of these people called Ibn al-Azraq, who's on the Khawarij, he asks Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu loads of questions about individual words of the Quran. For example, he says, okay, what about this word? What does this word mean? And Ibn Abbas would answer, and then he would say, do the Arabs know that? And then he would mention some lines of poetry. This is not an easy section to read. This is not an easy read, even for someone who's a pure Arab, who is doesn't speak any other language apart from Arabic. He would struggle to read these lines of poetry and understand what exactly is going on in these lines of poetry, because it's Jahili poetry. It's like for us, if we were to pick up some difficult Shakespearean poetry, we wouldn't understand what's going on. And to translate that is not an easy task. It's not an easy task. No doubt he would have had to have dictionaries in front of him as he's going through every single line and referring back to dictionaries, and someone who's got a good grasp of the language. So that's actually really beneficial, because what he's essentially did is interpreted the poetry for you and translated it for you. So that's beneficial. This is not an easy chapter to translate by any stretch of the imagination. The other chapters are probably a lot more easier to translate. So that's good. That's a good thing for somebody who wants to kind of engage with what is the author trying to say. How should one use this book, or who is this book for? This book isn't really for beginners. This book is not, especially this chapter. It's not for beginners, and nor are the first 4 chapters arguably there to sit down and read. It's not really for that, because the first 4 chapters really are, you have sometimes beneficial starts from a Suyuti describing maybe the overall of the chapter, but really a lot of it is just lists of words, and talking about the definition of those words, or what do these words mean. Some of them maybe because they have non-Arabic origins, or some of them because they don't have a Hijazi origin, or, like I mentioned, the poetry that Ibn Abbas is explaining. So the benefit comes from the researcher is, if you look at the back, you've got the Quranic index, right? And so, as you can see there. So, for example, let's say you are studying Surah Al-Ma'arij, for example. So what you can do is, let's say you're studying Surah Al-Ma'arij, you go back to the Quranic index and have a look, okay, was Surah Al-Ma'arij mentioned in these chapters? And then you refer back to those sections and benefit from what is the Suyuti saying in those sections about that surah. So I wouldn't say the first few chapters are a reading book. Certainly, that's not how I would engage with it. And rather as a reference book when you're looking at those surah, to look at, okay, which of these words are uncommon words, which of them don't have an Arabic origin, which of them don't have a Hijazi origin. Did Ibn Abbas, in these famous lines of poetry, or should I say infamous, because there's a massive discussion as it is even authentic to Ibn Abbas anyway, but that's a different discussion. But does he, were these mentioned in the poetry of Ibn Abbas? So the first four sections is actually really a reference part for you to benefit from. Then you've got these last few sections, chapter 40, chapter 41, chapter 42. So As-Suyuti, in his Itqan, he basically split up Ulum al-Quran into those different chapters. And every single chapter was for him an important kind of subsection of Ulum al-Quran. So these chapters are actually from, the book that he's translating, of course, Itqan Ulum al-Quran. The last parts are more of reading books that you can kind of read beginning to end. But again, really, this is going to be for somebody who is very much in the field and not for a beginner. So the first part is, the meaning of instruments adawat required by the mufassir, i.e., the meaning of the huruf. What does idh mean, and idha, and so on and so forth. The reason why this is more beneficial to kind of go through, it's almost like studying a text in linguistics, really, a summarized text in linguistics. And actually, number 41, he actually says in his introduction, is basically a summary of a book called Mughni al-Labib by Ibn Hisham, which is again a famous linguistic text work. And this is basically a summarized version of that. So you could say it's a reading book for those people who are in the field. Sh Sohaib is somebody who's very passionate about translating, and it's quite clear that one of the intended audiences for this book are translators, because when translators can now read these sections and understand, okay, the complexity and actually the depth that's required when you're translating, especially the Quran, So he's trying to lift up the field of translation in terms of, when you're looking at these different particles in the Quran, like idh and idha, what can they possibly mean, and how are you going to translate that? He's kind of assisted these people who are in the field, these translators, and those people who are interested in the Quran, in terms of he's made it more accessible, these vital kind of chapters, in allowing you to understand, how to translate the Quran. And then the final chapter is important rules that the mufassir must know. So I think, in summary, this is a really important contribution, actually, and it's very much going to assist people who are in the field. It's very much going to assist people who hope to be translators. To understand, okay, so the complexity of that, and it's going to assist people who, generally speaking, have an interest in tafsir. The first four sections. If you're ever doing, if you ever have a tafsir class, and of course, that's how I benefit from it. Of course, I have my weekly exploring the Quran. Is actually going back and having a look at the Quranic index. Does As-Suyuti mention any of these in his Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran? I also found it, except from the translator, Sh Sohaib Saeed, and from the author, Jalaluddin As-Suyuti, rahimahullah ta'ala. That brings the end of this review of this book.